On a humid Saturday morning, a man stands in front of a storage unit he has not opened in 8 months. The metal door rattles upward. Dust hangs in the light. Inside are the remains of earlier versions of himself. A treadmill used for 3 weeks, a dining set from an apartment he left 2 moves ago, boxes labeled cables, winter clothes, office stuff, memories. Important, random. He pays every month for this rectangle of metal and concrete, and standing there, he feels something that sounds ridiculous until you have felt it yourself. He feels owned. Not by a person, by accumulation. That is the hidden story behind a lot of modern money problems. People assume wealth is mostly about income. Earn more, solve more, make enough, and the rest will organize itself. But in real life, financial stability is often decided by something much quieter. How much of your life is being eaten by stuff? By the space that stuff demands, by the stress it creates, and by the investment opportunities it silently replaces. That is why people who own less often build more wealth. Not always, not automatically. Not because owning less is morally superior or aesthetically purer. It happens because every object in your life has a price tag beyond the register, and most people never calculate the full bill. They see the purchase. They do not see the maintenance, the storage, the upgrades, the insurance, the replacement cycle, the larger apartment, the bigger car, the busier calendar, the scattered attention, and the years of compounding that disappeared because cash was parked in a lifestyle instead of an asset. This is not really a story about minimalism. It is a story about drag, about the invisible force that keeps perfectly capable people earning decent money while feeling strangely stuck. About why 2 households with similar incomes can live in completely different financial realities. One feels padded, patient, difficult to knock over. The other looks full, maybe even impressive, but remains one broken appliance, one medical bill, one layoff, one rent hike away from panic. The difference is often not intelligence. It is not discipline in the dramatic sense. It is not some magical investing gift. It is simpler than that. One life has fewer leaks. The first leak is obvious once you see it. Stuff needs space, and space is expensive. That sentence sounds almost too plain to matter, which is exactly why it gets ignored. People think of possessions one object at a time, one chair, one shelf, one extra television, one backup appliance, one set of tools, one decorative impulse, one exercise machine, one hobby you swore you were about to start, one cart full of things that seemed useful at 11:30 at night. None of it feels life-changing alone. But objects do not arrive alone. They arrive as a crowd. And crowds need square footage. That is where the money starts disappearing in a way people rarely name correctly. They say they upgraded for comfort, for convenience, for quality of life. Sometimes that is true, but often what they really upgraded for was storage. The second bedroom becomes a warehouse with a window. The garage stops being for a car and starts becoming a museum of postponed decisions. Closets get packed, cabinets expand, shelving multiplies. Eventually, the home itself grows around the objects. And bigger space does not only cost more once, it costs more forever. Higher rent, higher mortgage, higher property taxes, more heating, more cooling, more furniture to make the bigger space not feel empty, more cleaning, more repairs, more visual noise. People think they are paying for room. Often they are paying to protect past purchases from the consequences of being unnecessary. Imagine 2 people living in the same city. One rents a modest 1-bedroom and is careful about what enters the apartment. The other rents a 2-bedroom, mostly because the extra room makes the rest of their buying possible. The difference is $400 a month. That is $4,800 a year. It does not stop there. The larger place needs more furniture, more decor, more utilities, more maintenance, more things to justify itself. Now stretch that over 10 years. Not just what was spent, but what that money failed to become. That is the part almost no one feels in the moment. Opportunity cost is silent. It does not send a bill. It does not shame you in public. It simply takes your options away in the future and leaves no obvious crime scene. A person who sends $400 a month into extra space for extra stuff is not only losing $400, They are losing what that 400 could have done if it had been left alone, invested, compounded, or even simply kept as cash buffer. Month after month, year after year, the invisible price rises. This is where owning less starts looking less like a personality trait and more like a financial advantage. Less stuff often means less house. That less house means lower fixed costs, and lower fixed costs create the one thing wealth building absolutely depends on: surplus, margin, the gap between what comes in and what your life demands just to continue being itself. That gap matters more than image. It matters more than almost every signal people use to guess who is doing well. Because wealth is rarely built by how expensive your life looks. It is built by what your life fails to consume. The second hidden cost is more subtle. Stuff creates upkeep. Every object enters your life like it is asking for almost nothing. Just a place to sit. Just a drawer. Just a shelf. Just a corner. But then time passes, and the object starts making demands. It needs assembly, it needs batteries, it needs charging, it needs software updates, it needs cleaning, it needs replacement parts. It needs organizing, it needs matching accessories, it needs a decision about where it belongs, it needs to be moved when you move, it needs to be remembered when you are making insurance claims, it needs to be sorted when it breaks, it needs to be sold, donated, recycled, repaired, stored, or thrown away. This is one of the strangest things about consumer life. The work begins after the purchase. And that work has a financial shadow. The more stuff you own, the more likely you are to spend money protecting, maintaining, or managing it. A cheap printer becomes ink and paper and frustration, and eventually a replacement printer because the old one dried up sitting idle. A bargain couch becomes a larger room, a delivery fee, stain protection, a cleaning service, maybe a storage problem during the next move. A discounted treadmill becomes floor mats, more space, and eventually guilt covered in laundry. Nothing here sounds dramatic. That is why it is so effective. Financial instability is usually not built by one villain. It is built by tiny, loyal employees working overtime in the background. The third cost is even harder to measure because it lives in the nervous system. Stuff creates stress. Not all of it. Not always. Useful, loved, intentional things can make a life better. But excess ownership does something people underestimate. It turns the environment into unfinished business. Every cluttered surface is a low-grade demand on attention. Every overfilled closet is a reminder that decisions are waiting. Every packed garage is a small background guilt. Every overstuffed home increases the friction of ordinary life. Now, finding things takes longer. Cleaning takes longer. Moving takes longer. Hosting feels harder. Leaving the house feels more chaotic. Returning to the house feels less restful. This matters financially because stress degrades judgment. A stressed person is more likely to outsource relief, more delivery, more convenience purchases, more duplicate buying because they cannot find what they already own, more late fees because bills got buried in life admin, more impulse spending because acquisition briefly feels like control, more expensive decisions made just to reduce cognitive overload. Look closely, and you will see this pattern everywhere. The person with too much in the house buys storage bins, shelving systems, organizers, labels, containers, external drives, cloud subscriptions, and bigger furniture to manage the consequences of their previous buying. Then they buy more because the organizing project created the feeling of progress. Consumption starts disguising itself as self-improvement. That is not just a clutter problem. It is a cash flow problem, wearing a clean outfit. Owning less does something powerful here. It lowers the number of things your brain has to keep track of. It reduces visual noise, decision fatigue, and logistical friction. It makes the house cheaper to run and easier to recover inside. And when your environment is calmer, your money behavior often becomes calmer with it. The fourth hidden cost is time. People talk about money and time as if they are cousins. In practice, they are often the same story told from different angles. Every object in your life has a time requirement. Shopping time, comparison time, delivery time, setup time, maintenance time, sorting time, moving time, repair time, disposal time. If the object is digital, add research, subscriptions, notifications, upgrades, compatibility problems, password recovery, and one more thing quietly asking for your attention. Now imagine a life filled with hundreds of these commitments. You do not feel the total burden at once. You feel it as fragmentation. Saturday disappears into errands. Evenings disappear into little resets. Entire weekends vanish into reorganizing, driving, returning, troubleshooting, cleaning, listing, picking up, dropping off, recharging, syncing, and fixing. Then people wonder why they never seem to have time to learn new skills, review their finances, plan taxes, negotiate raises, build a side income, or read enough to make better investment decisions. The answer is not always laziness. Sometimes their life is simply crowded with possessions pretending not to be work. And time, when recovered, has economic value. Time can be used to cook instead of overpaying for convenience. To compare insurance policies, to automate savings, to understand retirement accounts, to build a portfolio, to rest enough to think clearly, to take a certification, to apply for better jobs, to freelance, to fix income leaks, to make fewer desperate decisions. The person who owns less is often not just spending less money, they are recovering usable hours. That becomes a double advantage, lower expense and higher strategic capacity. Then comes the fifth cost, and it may be the most expensive of all, lost investment opportunity. This is where the story gets serious, because money spent on stuff does not only leave the account, it stops participating in the future. Picture a simple example. Someone spends $300 a month on non-essential accumulation. Not life improvement in the deep sense, not tools that increase earnings, just a steady stream of upgrades, decor, duplicates, hobby clutter, impulse purchases, novelty, fashion churn, and convenience objects that fade into the background after a few weeks. $300 a month does not feel like a fortune. In a single month, it looks survivable. In a single year, it looks like a lifestyle choice. Over 20 or 30 years, it starts looking like a missing asset. Because when money is invested consistently, time starts doing the heavy lifting. Contributions matter, but compounding matters more. What looks small in the present becomes massive through repetition. Not because finance is magical, because duration is powerful. The real competition in your financial life is not usually between spending and saving. It is between spending now and owning future income later. That is the hidden war most people do not realize they are fighting. A jacket, a gadget, a subscription bundle, an upgraded vehicle, a more expensive apartment because the current one feels crowded, a storage unit for items rarely used, a financed furniture set to make the larger place look complete. None of those choices merely cost what they cost. They also replace shares, index funds, interest, cash reserves, debt freedom, and future optionality. And optionality is one of the purest forms of wealth. The freedom to walk away from a bad job. The freedom to survive a slow year. The freedom to move cities. The freedom to turn down nonsense. The freedom to help family without becoming unstable. The freedom to recover from mistakes without falling through the floor. That freedom is funded by assets, and assets are often built from money that never became clutter. This is the part many people feel emotionally before they understand it mathematically. They look around at a full house and an empty investment account and experience a strange kind of disappointment. Not because the items are evil, because the trade was larger than they realized. They did not just buy objects. They sold tomorrow in pieces. Midway through this conversation, it helps to reframe the entire topic in a more honest way. Stuff is frozen labor. That every object you own represents hours of your life converted into physical form. Hours at a desk, hours standing on a shop floor, hours driving, answering, negotiating, lifting, coding, presenting, caring, solving, enduring. When you spend money, you are not only moving currency, you are assigning portions of your finite life to things. Sometimes that exchange is excellent: food, shelter, transportation, tools, healthcare, beauty, comfort, meaning, generosity. experiences worth remembering. But sometimes the trade is embarrassingly bad. You work weeks to buy something that will matter for maybe 5 days, then spend additional time maintaining it, storing it, and eventually getting rid of it. Once you start seeing consumption as hours transformed into objects, ownership changes shape. The question stops being, can I afford this? It becomes, is this where I want this slice of my life to live? That question is destabilizing in the best way, because it reveals why people who own less are often wealthier beneath the surface. They are not necessarily denying themselves pleasure. They are simply more selective about what gets to absorb their labor. More of their past work remains liquid, more of it gets invested, more of it is available for emergencies, for opportunities, for rest, for risk-taking when the right risk appears. The sixth cost is mobility, and almost nobody notices it until life changes. Owning a lot makes you slower. It makes moving homes more expensive. It makes career changes more complicated. It makes downsizing emotionally harder. It makes travel more difficult. It makes relocation for a better job feel like a crisis instead of a decision. It traps people in spaces, neighborhoods, and lifestyles they have outgrown because the exit cost feels unbearable. That has direct economic consequences. The person who can move quickly can chase opportunity. They can reduce expenses fast if they need to. They can leave a bad landlord, a declining area, or an overstretched setup before it becomes a long-term financial wound. The person buried in possessions often delays action, and delay is expensive. There is a reason financially resilient people often talk about flexibility with the same seriousness other people reserve for status. Flexibility is not vague, it is operational. It changes what choices are available when circumstances shift. Owning less increases flexibility, and flexibility protects wealth. The seventh cost is identity. A lot of spending is not practical at all. It is symbolic. People buy versions of themselves. The successful version, the organized version, the cultured version, the fitness version, the domestic version, the luxury version, the version that finally looks like someone who has made it. That urge is human, but it becomes financially dangerous when objects are used to stabilize self-worth, because then the buying never really ends. The relief is brief, the image fades. A new comparison arrives. A newer standard appears. The home must keep signaling. The wardrobe must keep updating. The tech must keep refreshing. The car must keep matching the story. Consumption becomes emotional maintenance. And emotional maintenance is expensive because it has no natural stopping point. People who own less are often protected from this spiral not because they have transcended ego, but because they stopped asking possessions to carry so much psychological weight. Their identity is less outsourced. Their home is allowed to be useful instead of performative. Their money gets to serve reality instead of theater. That shift is enormous. Because once your finances stop being a stage set, they can start becoming a support structure. Now here is the part that matters most. Owning less only builds wealth when the freed money is directed somewhere meaningful. A person can own less and still drift. They can consume less and simply let the difference disappear into random spending. The point is not deprivation, the point is redirection. Less stuff should create more capital, more emergency savings, more debt payoff, more retirement contributions, more index fund investing, more cash to handle irregular expenses, more room to say no, more ability to buy assets instead of appearances. That is when the strategy becomes visible in results. The unused room becomes a lower rent bill. The lower rent bill becomes monthly surplus. The surplus becomes automatic investing. The investing becomes assets. The assets become dividends, growth, security, and options. 10 years later, the difference no longer looks like a preference. It looks like a different life. This is why some of the wealthiest feeling people are not the ones surrounded by the most possessions. They are the ones with the most margin. The ones whose paychecks are not already promised away. The ones whose houses are not packed with forgotten purchases and hidden obligations. The ones whose money has somewhere better to go than storage. And that brings us back to stress. Because stress is not just one cost among many, it is the amplifier. When a person is overstretched, cluttered, behind, and financially tight, they become more vulnerable to bad choices. They buy convenience because they are exhausted. They avoid statements because they are ashamed. They keep paying for things they do not use because dealing with it feels mentally expensive. They stop investing because the future feels abstract and the present feels loud. Owning less reduces noise. Reduced noise improves attention. Improved attention improves decisions. Better decisions compound just as surely as invested money does. That may be the quietest advantage of all. Not just more money in the account, but a mind less constantly interrupted by the consequences of past consumption. So, what does this look like in practice? It looks like refusing to rent storage for your indecision. It looks like being suspicious of any purchase that requires more space than your life naturally has. It looks like choosing a home for living, not for warehousing identities you no longer inhabit. It looks like asking of every object, "What will this cost me after I own it?" It looks like deleting the fantasy that a busier, fuller, more upgraded life is automatically a richer one. It looks like measuring wealth not by visible abundance, but by retained flexibility, by investable surplus, by calm. And maybe most of all, it looks like understanding that empty space is not always waste. Sometimes empty space is evidence that your life is not overburdened. An uncluttered room can be a financial statement. So can a smaller apartment, a paid-off car that is not exciting, bond a closet that closes easily, a garage that fits an actual vehicle, a calendar not dominated by maintenance, an investment account quietly growing because your lifestyle stopped eating everything before your future could touch it. That is the real contrast. One person lives in a home full of owned things, but little financial leverage. Another lives with less, but owns pieces of businesses, a growing cash reserve, a cleaner balance sheet, and the ability to withstand friction. The first life looks fuller, the second one is often richer. And richness, in the deepest sense, is not about how much you can display. It is about how much pressure your life can absorb without cracking. Go back to that storage unit. The metal door is still open. The boxes are still there. The monthly charge has been quietly extracting money for months, maybe years, without changing the owner's life in any meaningful way. In that moment, the truth becomes embarrassingly clear. The unit is not holding value. It is holding deferred decisions with rent attached. A surprising amount of modern consumption works exactly like that. People are not only buying objects, they are buying delayed clarity, outsourced identity, expanded square footage, extra maintenance, more stress, less mobility, and smaller future portfolios. That is why owning less can become such a powerful wealth strategy. Not because less is automatically noble, because less can remove drag, less can shrink fixed costs, less can protect attention, less can release cash, less can speed recovery, less can travel forward into investments instead of sitting motionless in plastic bins. The people who understand this do not necessarily live empty lives. They live edited ones. And editing is profitable. It keeps the useful, the meaningful, the beautiful, the loved. Then it makes room for something far more powerful than excess possession. Room for liquidity, room for compounding, room for peace, room for choice. In the end, wealth is not only what you earn, and it is not only what you own. It is what remains available after your lifestyle has finished making its demands. People who own less often build more because they leave more of their life unconsumed. More money escapes the gravity of maintenance. More time escapes the gravity of management. More attention escapes the gravity of clutter. And once those resources are free, they can finally do what wealth has always required. They can grow.